We had a case, and I think that this might have been the only time that Carlos really got mad at me. So we got called into the lieutenant's office, and we sit down, and the lieutenant says, "I have these two robberies and possible a shooting that is the same guy, and no one knows where he is. What the hell's going on? I have a meeting with the chief at 1:00." So me, just being the wise ass I was, I'm like, all right, what do we got on him? All we have is a male black named Jerome with gold teeth. I go, all right, what time's your meeting with the chief? He goes, 1:00. And now it's like 10:00 in the morning. I go, all right, we'll have him by 1:00. And I grab the folder and we walk out of his office. Carlos looks at me and goes, dude, what are you doing? What are you doing? I'm like, come on, let's go. I got an idea. Let's try to get this done. He's like, are you out of your mind? We have Jerome with gold teeth in the Bronx. Yeah, let's go. So we end up going to the first scene of a shooting, which was on the Grand Concourse. So we're walking in the building, and there's a guy walking out, and he gives us kind of that look, about why they're here. So we get on the sidewalk, and we turn around. I said, listen, if he turns around and looks at us, we're going to go grab him. And he turns around, he looks at us, so we run across the concourse, and we stop him and start talking to him. He actually gives up the guy who did the shooting. He goes, listen, I don't know his name, but I know where his sister lives. Here's the address. Here's the street his sister lives on. So now we still have no idea whether we're right or not. So we go over to the sister's location. We're sitting on the street, and a guy comes walking down the street with a beer in a brown paper bag. And he walks up, and Carlos goes, leans out the window, starts talking to him. So I'm in the driver's seat, and Carlos in the passenger seat talking to him. Now, Carlos could talk to anybody. Anyone on any level, Carlos can talk to and get a laugh out of. That's just how he is. So I noticed that he's not opening his mouth. So I go, Carlos, tell him a joke. Make him laugh. So he makes him laugh, and sure as hell, he's got gold teeth. So I go, okay. So we get out of the car. We're like, listen, we got to give you a summons for the beer you got. He's like, oh, man, really? We're like, yeah, you have your ID on you. He goes, no, it's upstairs in my sister's house. Okay, let's go. Let's go get your ID. We said, what's your name? And he said, I think he said Michael something. So we're like, all right, Mike, come on, let's go. Let's go get your ID. So we go upstairs, and his sister opens the door. And what does she say? Jerome, what trouble you in now? Grab him, throw him on the ground, cuff him. We get his ID. We get back to the precinct at 12:45.
Oh, my God.
We call the chief. The lieutenant's already in the chief's office. We call his office, and he's like, what do you want? He said, we got him. He goes, what? I said, we got him. You want to come back here? You want us to deliver him to you? He goes, you have? He said, yeah, we got him. And he gave up the shooting, and he gave up the 4 robbers.
Oh, my, that's incredible.
So that was Carlos's and I's, real one we loved. And that was, I could sit here and BS you that was a bunch of skill. That was pure luck. The planets aligned, the stars aligned, and it just happened to be a good day. And we ended up getting them at 12:45, which made it even better.
Well, you know what? Again, another old adage, right? Sometimes you'd rather be lucky than good.
Oh, absolutely.
That's one of those instances, right?
Absolutely. And that's a perfect example.
Emergency, 1998. Units, I think, as I've said before, this is the peak era, and no disrespect to the other ones, of ESU, because you got the housing rescue guys there now from the merger, the transit rescue guys too. So all that knowledge blended into ESU. It's a great time to be there. But, listen, when you say you want something, now they're going to hold you to it. And here's 6 months to prove just how bad you want it. So tell me about those 6 months at the STS and what helped you get through, because even though it's something that you want, it doesn't mean it's not going to be tough.
It was probably the greatest 6 months of my police career, because they pay you to go to school and learn all of this incredibly fun stuff. To your point, if you're a hands-on guy, go to work. 2 weeks, you get to shoot a lot of big guns. 2 weeks, you go put on hazmat suits and go do that. You do high-angle rope rescue. You go do scuba diving. I mean, they teach you all these incredible things. and you're doing it, on the police department's dime. Now, it is long and arduous, and it can take a lot out of you, but I loved it. I had a great group of guys that I went through. I mean, you've interviewed a few of them. John Murphy, Lieutenant John Murphy, he was Sergeant John Murphy back then. He was our squad boss in STS. We used to commute every day. One of the, greatest guys I ever met. And, we probably should catch up more often than we do now. But, whenever we do catch up, we still get to reminisce about STS. And it was just great. I mean, there were parts that for me were more challenging than others. I went through STS. I was probably, 150 pounds. Was in great shape, but I was very light. Carrying a Hurst tool and a Jaws, a Hurst tool motor and a Jaws around for training is hard. It's tough work. It's very physical. But what I had going for me was, I was into auto mechanics. I could build cars. I could weld. I could do things like that. I was into jet skiing, which was part of the ESU training back then. I had a jet ski. And I wasn't scared of heights, right? I used to, as a kid, the wiffle ball would go up on the roof of our 2.5-story house, and I'd put a ladder up and go straight up there and get it. And it was just one of those things I wasn't scared of, and then I didn't have claustrophobia, right? Which brings in the scuba and the hazmat piece. So I had kind of a skill set that could work for ESU, and then they refine it, right? And I remember one of the first weeks I was in ESU class. We had a lieutenant in charge, was Lieutenant Glenn Panizzola, and he brought us in a room and he gave us a scenario. And he, went to the first guy. He's like, all right, well, how would you solve this? And he gave an answer. And then he went to the second guy. How would you solve this? And he went to the third guy, and the third guy goes, I agree with the first guy. And he said, you're useless to me. He goes, your job isn't to agree with anybody. Your job is to give me another option. ESU is not here to just say, yeah, I think that guy did it right. We're here to look at it and make decisions and look at it from every possible angle. And I just remember that day, because then the next thing they did was put us in a circle and drop the flashbang in the middle, so we knew what it felt like. And I thought that was really an interesting way to approach it. But what Lieutenant Panizzola said really stuck with me was, it doesn't matter how good you think the last guy's idea was, you still got to try to think, if that doesn't work, we're going to still have to solve this problem. So let me keep thinking, and let me think past, what's in front of me. And that's just the kind of mindset they wanted you to have, is you're a cop. It doesn't matter what your rank is. You put that uniform on, they're calling you there to solve some really complicated problems at times. And, you're rolling up with that truck full of millions of dollars of equipment. You need to understand how to use it, how to apply it, how the guys that are senior to you have taught you to apply it, and how they've done it in the past. And you start to put that skill set together. And that's what STS becomes, is they bring guys in from the field. I remember they brought in Tony Favaro when I was in, and I ended up working with him, and then he ended up working for me, which was an interesting dynamic over time. But he came in and talked to us about hostage negotiation and EDPs, and he spent a lot of time working with John Jay on the EPT school, Emergency Psychological Technician School. And Tony was just a really good resource. And as they brought field guys in to support the training that the really good core group of people at the school had, it just made for a great mix, and we had we had a big class compared to probably, some of the other ones. We had 4 groups of guys rotating around, but it was great. Like I said in the beginning, it was, you could send me to training forever. If you want to pay me to do it and then let me apply it somewhere, it's a home run.
Let's see, 95, 96, 97. They sent me to 412 school in 99, which it's an honor. And not everyone got picked for it. I had an instrument rating going into aviation. It's one of the reasons I was able to get in. That impressed the lieutenants and the captain and the guy from personnel that was in the interview room. A couple of things helped. A, ESU is already an SOD, and so is aviation. So it's just a walk across the room in the SOD complex with my name, and they drop it on the aviation desk. It impressed them that I got my instrument rating before I applied. Let me just backtrack real quick. I took 6 weeks off. I took all of my vacation time in the spring of 1995. Went to California. I already had my private license, but you needed a commercial fixed wing or helicopter, but fixed wing or helicopter license to apply to aviation. I went up, I did one better and got a commercial fixed wing with an instrument rating. So I went straight through my 6 weeks vacation time out in LA and came back with it and applied to the aviation unit. And luckily for me, because people don't leave aviation, two guys, I don't even know their names, and I don't, I wouldn't say if I did. Two guys got bounced out of the unit. And that left two openings. That's hardly ever happened before. And I got lucky. I got picked up. I did well on the interview. Like I said, the instrument rating impressed them. And that's how I got in. So I got sidetracked there. I was talking about the 412, but it helped a lot that I was instrument rated and that I was contributing and being a good cop in the aviation unit, that I got picked to go to 412 school. And once I got done, so you come back, and then there was a detective named John Fagan. If you're watching, John, thank you. He was known as the dentist because you would rather go to the dentist than get instruction from him. He was tough. Then my primary instructor, when I first got there, his nickname was the hygienist. He wasn't as tough as the dentist was. And I can't believe I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But anyway, John Fagan is the one that checked me out in the 412. And you have to do Bambi buckets. You have to do diver drops. Medevac situations. I mean, it's a bigger footprint than the Bell 206 that we were flying for patrol. And so I got back from Texas. I guess it was probably a month and a half, 2 months before I was actually checked out and signed off as a 412 pilot. Some of the greatest flying of my life.
You were thrown into the deep end of the pool right away because here you are a year into it. And 1998 presents another holy crap, he's on to something moment where 1993 had turned people on to who Osama bin Laden was and what he meant for America's future and Americans by extension, I should say. Then comes, of course, the attack on the U.S. Air Force Base in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, Khobar Towers in 1996. Then he does an interview with John Miller on ABC in 1998, June of 1998 to be exact, is when it aired. 2 months later, the embassy bombings in Nairobi in Kenya, U.S. embassy bombings to be exact. 224 people, including, I believe, a United States Marine, were killed in that attack. And here you are, like I said, a year into your time at the FBI, sent out to Nairobi to investigate. Tell me about that.
So, you're exactly right on your timeline. And so I came in 97, and as we talked, have been working street crimes and local issues. And I land at the Washington field office. I get assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force. And in 1997, a lot of the direction of the Joint Terrorism Task Forces, and there were only a handful of them, New York, Chicago, Washington, D.C., was domestic terrorism. It was following Timothy McVey and the bombing in the Murrah Federal Building in April of 1995. So we were still following up on that case. The trials were coming up. So we were working a lot of domestic terrorism across the country because that was the threat of the day. Right? There were agents that I remember that knew a lot about the international terrorism stuff, and that wasn't the world that I came from, and I was kind of thrown into the international domestic terrorism world. And there were people who could just rattle off who the players were and that kind of stuff. And I thought, wow, that's just amazing. It's very difficult when you don't come from that arena to even figure out how the naming of subjects goes. What's first name, last name, grandparents' name, all this kind of stuff. And it's that in and of itself is a skill set, right? When you're not coming from that world, and knowing the workings of why people are angry with the United States or with the West, this type of thing. And you're 100% right. It was that fatwa called by bin Laden that was the writing on the wall, right? In August of 1998, the August 7th, the bombs went off in Nairobi in Tanzania. And I had just gotten onto the evidence response team at Washington Field Office, which is an extra duty where you get specialized training in evidence recovery, forensic recovery, fingerprints, DNA recovery, all these kinds of things. And I was lucky enough to get onto that team because of my career in law enforcement before. There was a canvas that went out, and because I had a detective background and this type of stuff, I was able to get onto the team. And the team had deployed to Riyadh and Kobar and these kinds of things. And I was just, amazed that I was going to potentially have the opportunity to go to something like this to work. And it was those embassy bombings. I was actually in the gym in the basement of the Washington Field Office on a treadmill, and somebody said, "Hey, you're on the evidence team, right?" I said, "Yeah, just got on." And they said, "Well, better get your bags packed. You'll be going to Africa." I'm like, "What for?" And they're like, pointed to the television, and there was the embassy bombing. And it was at that time I kind of realized, hey, I actually may go. I don't know if I'm going to go. And got upstairs to the squad, and that's where we started rolling out to the embassy bombings. And we deployed out of Andrews Air Force Base with our evidence response team, some investigators from the Washington Field Office, and then investigators from the New York Field Office, because John O'Neill, who was the SAC over the counterterrorism there, was the guy who had been saying this guy bin Laden is trouble. And agents like Ali Soufan, who was on their counterterrorism, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, these guys have been kind of saying that bin Laden is he is the next big trouble that we're going to be having, and they were 100% right. And so we went to Nairobi, stayed there for several weeks, sifting through the rubble. And I can remember, again, it's one of those moments in a career where something happens and you realize that trajectory of your career is about to change. And we pulled up in a small white van, our evidence team. We arrived in Nairobi, and when we pulled in the van, we got out, and I had never seen anything like this. Right, there was a bank next to the Ufundi Day, the school, and then the embassy. And I believe it was 28-story bank building was completely gutted. And there was, people were like 5,000 people were injured in downtown Nairobi. And so everything was destroyed. Just the sheer size of this bombing was just, it took you back, right? I mean, and I looked at that and I said, I don't want to do anything but counterterrorism. If you can potentially get in the front of something like this from happening somewhere in the world, anywhere in the world, then that is going to be just makes everything come together for why you're doing this. And so we worked that scene and put together a lot of really good evidence. Tying people that were bombers, tying people who were involved. One of the bombers actually ran away from the scene, but was injured. And, we went and swabbed for explosive residue and DNA in his hotel room. And I say hotel room in kind of like a shanty hotel room, and put all these pieces together. So the investigators, and that's what the evidence team does. They collect the evidence forensically to assure that the investigative teams are getting the very best evidence they potentially could to help them put their case together. And I found that to be one of the most interesting parts of my career, was working the evidence response team. And because we were at Washington field office, our opportunities were just, I mean, almost to the point where it was too much at some points, because we had Africa, the Middle East, and Eastern Europe. It changed over the years, but that was our responsibility for any counterterrorism crimes against U.S. interests or U.S. citizens. So you can imagine, as things progressed in the war on terror, it fell to the Washington field office and the New York field office and other field offices to assist repeatedly. And 1998 was the first, and very impactful in my career.
I was working with Henry Medina, and I think it was in the 3-0 precinct. It was in the early 90s. And the individual, he had mental health issues. And the original call, the precinct officers came up to his house, and the mother called in and said, "I can't control my son anymore." And the son was like about 40 years old. And the original officers came up there, and I believe at that time he was like a hoarder, clothing all over. The original officers they knocked on the door, and then he turned on a chainsaw. I believe he tried to chainsaw the officers. Duty captain arrived, requested emergency service. We responded. We took over the door. We made entry into the apartment. We had everything. We had helmets, ballistic shields, tasers, Israeli tear gas, every type of non-lethal thing that we ever had. And we went in there. It was very tight, very, very narrow. There were clothing, garbage all over. He attacked us. He charged at us, and then he reached down, and he had he had a gas-operated chainsaw. He turned that on and attempted to chainsaw us. So we backed out. We backed out of the apartment, and we regrouped. But, he has the chainsaw in there. It was extremely Kenny Sergeant. We were underneath the command of Sergeant Bowen, outstanding sergeant. And he could have, he had tons of gasoline in there. He's trying to chainsaw everything in the apartment. And then we were, just as first two officers inside were Detective Medina, Henry Medina, and Jimmy McVey. And Jimmy goes to me, "Seth, you're the designated shooter, because somebody has to be the designated shooter." And I was a new guy. I said, and we had our gas masks on. And Jimmy and Henry made entry into the apartment, and it's extremely narrow apartment. And once again, hit them with everything that they had. Is really this went on, I think, for like 2 hours. Between the initial contact and this contact, hit him with everything, trying to talk to him, incoherent, and hit him with everything. And then he overpowered Jimmy and Henry, and then I was right behind them. He overpowered them, and they had fallen on the ground, and they were holding the shield up. And he was going down for a lunge. I had the gas mask on. I yelled out clearly, "Don't." And he was going to kill them. And then I discharged my firearm to stop him. And back then, we had the new Glocks with the full metal jacket. It was not a hollow nose. And I had a good shot pattern, but it didn't stop him. I shot. And he just got up and looked at me. And then I just went back to my Army tactics, which helped me out throughout the job. Just try to change where I was. And then he started charging at me. And I didn't think the gun worked because it didn't put him down. And I was going to shoot the remaining rounds see if that would work. And then my next best thing was to use a chair that was right there, that was in the garbage, and go hands-on, but that never happened. He just approached me and just went down. But Jimmy was saying, shoot, shoot, shoot. And there was no way, I'm not going to let 2 New York City police officers get chainsawed and stabbed. I'm not going to have that happen, and then I stopped him. He passed on at the scene there. And Jimmy, I was a little nervous, and Jimmy gave me a big hug. And Kenny Bowen was there, Sergeant Bowen, who's probably the best sergeant I ever knew. He's a great guy. He took charge of the situation. He always had our backs. And I just saw Sergeant Bowen the last time I saw you at 2 Truck on September 11th. I'd do anything for Sergeant Bowen. He's a great man. He had my back. And I'm not going to let any New York City police officer get killed. Not on my watch. That's my thing. And then I think we all ended up, it was so strenuous. We all ended up in Columbian Presbyterian. All I know is they put me in an ambulance. They took my blood pressure. They said, you better lie down. Jimmy McVey was in there. Henry Medina was in there. And took us over to Columbian Presbyterian. I said, I don't feel so good. My chest was like, because it was a long, stressful situation. And then I gave the attendant, because I just gave him $20. I said, make sure you guys, make sure me and the fellas get taken care of. We're not doing so good. So I gave him $20, and next thing you know, I was on a gurney. I had an EKG on me. Jimmy McVey, he was out. We were all on oxygen. It was pretty stressful. And Kenny Bowen was there. He led us through that situation. I would do anything for him. He's a great sergeant. And thank God he was there with me. And I think we were there for a couple of hours till our signs were better. And then John DeLara drove me home. Everybody got driven home that day. And I'm glad that Jimmy McVeigh's all right and Henry Medina's all right. But nobody's going to I didn't want anybody to get, no New York City police officer should get, I'm not going to let anybody get killed. So, unfortunately, but we did everything possible to prevent that from happening. But I don't want anybody getting hurt on my watch. I was just a junior man. These are all senior guys. And that's what happened that day. And I'm just glad everybody walked away from it safely. But he had tremendous, Kenny Bowen told me how much, he had a lot of gasoline in there. It was a bad situation. Nobody wanted to see anybody pass on like that. I'm sorry anybody's life was taken, but I have to protect New York City police officers' lives from getting killed.
It's the West Side, right by the Trade Center, ironically, where this animal gets that truck from Jersey, comes down, and mows down these people who are just trying to enjoy a late fall day in the city, and kills 8 of them, tragically. And here you are for that case where the weapon isn't an explosive device. It's a truck. It's an everyday thing that most people use to get around. Get like that where you have one weapon there, the truck. You don't know what else he has. He's been taken into custody at this point, so at least you know who he is. What was that scene like?
That day was funny. I was with John Kenny. John Kenny was another emergency guy that came over to JTTF, and John was, I would say John was there maybe for a year, just about. And I told John, I said, let's go outside. It's gorgeous. I want to smoke a cigar, and I want to have a cup of coffee. We were in Chelsea in the office. He said, all right, let's go. We went out front. We grabbed our radios, put our radios on our pants belt, and we're sitting out front, and we heard the job unfold. And my vehicle was parked on 10th Avenue in front of the building. We jumped in my vehicle. I turned the lights on. I pulled a U-turn on 10th Avenue, went counterflow on traffic. We flew down the West Side Highway, and we just saw the carnage. You just saw body parts. People were hovering over, just like, just jumbled bodies. And we just flew down to where we heard they were screaming on the radio. Now they're screaming shots fired. And we were getting ready. We were getting ready to engage this guy. And I had pulled up and you saw where the truck just hit the school bus. There were kids trapped in the school bus, and we saw the cops engaging him, and the perp was down. And we ran up to this, and myself and John Kenny, EMS was there. EMS pulled up. They grabbed him. I told John, I said, John, you secure the scene. I'm going to the hospital. I'm going to print this guy. We're going to find out who this guy is. So John had all of his clothes. John had his cell phone. He went to the hospital. I diverted. I went to 26 Federal Plaza, and we had a machine that was able to print you, do a ocular scan, and send off and find out who you were. I can't say the name of it. I'm not allowed to say the name of it, but I grabbed it. I went to the hospital. I walked right into the ER. All the big bosses were there. Commissioner Miller was there. John Miller was there. There was a couple of big chiefs from the squads. They knew me. They knew me from big jobs. So I walked in with the briefcase, and I walked right into the operating room, and the doctor was sewing him up, and he's like, "You can't be in here." I said, "Doc, calm down. I'm going to be in here. I got to print this guy." And we got into a little bit of a heated argument. I told him, I said, "Doc, I said, I'm telling you right now, if you got a problem, you're going to have a serious issue with this." I said, "You take care of the patient. I got to print him." They finished sewing him up. We wheeled him out. I started to print him, and the prints weren't coming back for some reason. This was basically a portable life scan machine. So I printed him. I transmitted the prints. I had a Taru guy there helping me. We took his ocular scan. It still wasn't coming back. I did it 3 times. So now I got on the phone with, I called up because our jock was activated. And I called up my boss. I said, "Hey, Lou, it's Vinny." I said, "We got a problem. This guy is not coming back. I'm not getting any hits on this guy." So I called up One Police Plaza, and I had latent prints in my car. I kept a latent print kit in my car for major case prints. So I ran back upstairs. I grabbed my bag. I got my latent print, my major case prints, and I actually printed this guy old school with ink in the operating room. I'm printing this guy in the operating room. I grab the prints. I get back in my vehicle. I fly down to One Police Plaza. They're waiting for me. We go upstairs, and within an hour and a half later, we had this guy ID'd. I now shoot back to the scene. We get back to the scene. It's hectic, complete chaos. We got back to the scene. We figured out who this guy was. The investigation started, and now it starts to slow down. And now we start to figure out. We see he has his ISIS flag on the front seat. He has his backpack. And now we start to figure out, okay, this is definitely terrorism. And the next morning, obviously the scene was handed off to us. We're the hazardous evidence response team, and we started to process the scene. We had to cut the rounds out of the tree for where the cop shot. We had to process the car. There was a lot to do. It was a lot. But emergency service and the JTTF members, everyone worked hands down. NYPD crime scene, everyone worked, no issues, no complaints, like a fine oil machine.
Talking about this recently, like when I got into EMRU, I was like, "Oh, my arrest days are behind me. No more arrests, no more central booking, no more." Yeah, I think I was with Tommy Bender right out of the training on a midnight, and somebody came up and said their car was just stolen. So we're like, "Well, you got to go to the precinct." He goes, "No, it's going right by. There it is." And we chased him. He ended up crashing. We cut him out of the car with the hearse tool. And they were like, I'm like, "Anybody want this car?" He's almost dead. He's yours. So I ended up with that. My first grand larceny auto collar, and then vouchering the car. Also very common in transit to have to inventory everything from a car that you're vouchering. So it was a long thing. But I ended up making...
Because there's a lot of cars on the way.
Chasing somebody for stealing a sign off of a bus. Anita?
Tell that story, Anita.
You don't remember that? When I chased the guy on foot? in the Bronx. We were going over the bridge, and the guy was peeling the sign off.
I have a different recollection of that.
Yeah, she had her brain still
didn't he have
functioning.
the Puerto Rican parade?
That is
He had
correct.
the Puerto Rican flag on his.
And it was the Puerto Rican Day parade that day.
Correct.
And they got caught in traffic. I went over to get him, and he jumped out of the car. And I was driving and started chasing him and left the truck running with the keys, with the machine gun in the truck. Yeah. Thankfully, one of us had their brain still working, not me, and went back and got the truck. And I just, continued my stupidity through the streets of the Bronx.
One did admonish the gentleman in a very nice way.
Yes, he was not arrested.
December 26, 1984, John White and myself delivered a baby girl on the L train, 14th Street and 8th Avenue.
Oh, wow.
Yep, just about a week after I got into the unit.
Sheesh.
Yeah, I think it was either number 4 or number 5 for the young lady. And we got there and water had just broke. I said, well, John, here we go. He says, oh, you got this, kid. That's okay. Together we delivered a nice little baby girl. We went back to patrol. The post cop got the picture in the paper. I think they named the kid after like his middle name or something. But that was probably the best one. Delivering a baby is always nice, considering all the other stuff we had to see and handle over our years. Delivering a baby was good.
That's more than okay. You're doing a great job. You're certainly educating me and educating the audience tonight, and we appreciate it. One thing I did want to spend just a little bit of time on, because this was something that was in your court, quite literally, and that was the opioids trial. And this is something that's tugging at the heartstrings of many. It's ripped at the country. It's ripped at many different families. So many people have been adversely impacted by it. Mm-hmm. And now it comes in the New York sense to your courtroom. Now, for those that may not have a familiarity with the particular aspects of this case, as far as what we can discuss, what was this case comprised of? And out of all the cases you've handled in your near 50 years of experience, how difficult was this case to handle, if at all?
First of all, the opioid case was called a coordinated case. And we have a concept called venue. Venue is if you are a resident of Suffolk County and you have a case, you bring the case, you have an opportunity to bring the case in your venue, Suffolk County, right? In the opioid litigation, I think there's 61 or 62 counties. So every county potentially could have been a venue for the case, a specific venue. Suffolk does Suffolk, Nassau does Suffolk, the city does the city, Rensselaer County, Wyoming County, places you never even heard of, all right? Right. So it was called a coordinated case. And it was coordinated because there was a determination to have the cases heard, all the cases, despite the change, the venue aspects of it, all the cases to be brought in one court. And that was Suffolk County, the Suffolk County courts. What's the logic of that? Well, the case is a Supreme Court case. So if you have 61 Supreme Court judges hearing the case, hearing essentially allegations and having to decide motions, there's a potential you're going to have conflicting decisions among the various counties. So they coordinate the cases, and all the cases get heard on a coordinated basis before one court, and that court was Suffolk County. So the case started with one case, Suffolk County, and then it grew. It grew as other counties filed lawsuits. The cases got transferred to Suffolk County for coordination. Coordination means the same process I told you about in a civil case: a summons, complaint, motion practice, discovery, jury selection, and trial. What the court could not have handled the case without the aid and assistance of Judge Marks, who at the time was on the top of the second top of the court system. Judge St. George eventually took his place, Judge Cracker. They provided us with the resources we need in order to manage the case. There were times the case was live streamed, as you may or may not know. The trial was live streamed on a nationwide basis.
Oh, yes.
So there were times where there were more than 100 lawyers participating. So much so that they had to, they couldn't fit them in any courtroom. So they took we had the pleasure of having a law school, Toro Law School, take their big auditorium and convert it into I don't know if you know this, they converted it into a courtroom because they had big seats all over the place and balcony, and all the lawyers could come in. Oftentimes it was like, the children's puzzle, Where's Waldo?
Yes.
You walk in and see lots and lots of lawyers. I can speak of what's a matter of record. There were over 9,000 documents filed in connection with the case. It's called ECF, electronic filing, right? I think before this case, the record number of filings was about 1,700. So there was 9,000 filings. There were 900 trial exhibits. Trial exhibit is a document that's produced during the course of the trial for the jury to consider. The court rendered about 400 written decisions, either what they call short form orders, court notices, or formal decisions along the way, mostly in terms of motion practice and discovery. We screened 500 jurors because, part of the important thing is, by the way, the lawyers were spectacular, both sides, all sides. Great lawyers, prepared every day. How they did it, I don't know. They lived out of hotels because they came up here. They stayed basically at the 2 hotels by the courthouse or one up in Huntington, and they showed up every day prepared. They knew their cases. It was a pleasure working with them. I told you before that in civil trials that the judge doesn't participate. Remember, I said you go to a room?
Yes.
In this case, it was different. We thought that the court should participate, and the court did participate in the jury selection. We pre-screened 500 jurors with a questionnaire, a jury questionnaire, a comprehensive questionnaire. And at the end of the screening process, which took, I guess, I forget now, probably took about a week. At the end of the screening process, we came up with 6 jurors, primary jurors. And in all civil cases, and criminal cases, you have alternate jurors. So you have a primary, in a civil case, you have 6 primary jurors, and you can have up to 6 alternate jurors. And an alternate juror is a juror who sits, takes the same oath as all the other jurors, but is called upon to participate in deliberations in the event one of the primary jurors gets sick or can't make it. So we had 6 and 6, so we had 12. In criminal cases, of course, in felonies you have 12 jurors. In misdemeanors you have 6. We had 12 jurors starting, and that jury sat for about 6 months, right? And they paid attention. They were a great group of people. I could tell you, I treated them to Gargiulo Bakery products in the morning. I brought stuff in because they were so dedicated. And they rendered their verdict, I think, on December 29th. It'll be that was the date, and they deliberated for about 10 days. Constant deliberations, 10 days. And it was important because they paid attention. They called for all the exhibits, 900 exhibits. These aren't one-page exhibits.
Long.
They called for deposition testimony because there was a lot of deposition testimony. Again, the case was live streamed. And it was certainly the most challenging case I've ever seen in my career. But I'm certain that many of my colleagues could have handled it just as well as I did. They were helpful. And like I said, Judge Marks, Judge St. George, Judge Greco gave the court, I don't say me, the court gave the court resources to do it. Don't forget, because we were at another location, most cases you have one stenographer, right? One person.
Yes.
We had to have multiple stenographers because there's so much work. And they worked in shifts. And why? Because the lawyers ordered the court minutes on a daily basis. So that we get done at 5 o'clock, by 8 o'clock at night, those lawyers have the minutes from that day, the testimony. And they work through the night. So we had multiple stenographers. We had multiple court officers because they had to set up all of the security at Toro, at the law school. Clerks. They gave me a great deal of research assistance, which I needed, which I didn't need. The court needed, and we got to the finish line eventually. There was a verdict, but eventually all the cases were resolved by settlement. And the settlement documents, I think they're all uploaded. They ran 95 pages long, each one. We got done. I'll talk about it. I guess I'll remember bits and pieces of it throughout the balance of my life. But the lawyers were a pleasure. Both sides, good people from all over the country, by the way, not just New York, all over the country. They came from as far as California. We had firms from Boston. I'm sure we had people out of the Washington D.C. area. We had Texas lawyers who fit right in. So the beneficiaries were the concession people in the courthouse.
Oh, I'm sure
they didn't have that many. They had more customers than they ever dreamt they would have. Yeah. So it was good. It was good, and it was an experience.
One of the real fires that I like to talk about was we had a fire in 1988. So I'm getting pretty close to getting promoted, and we get a fire one night, a couple blocks from quarters, and they're telling us, you're going to work. Warren Fuchs might have been working up aboard, but I got to tell this guy Dave Gianelli's driving, and we make the turn into the fire block, and it's like 4-story empty, and there's a ball of fire at the front door. And as we pull up past the front of the building, an exposure force side, you can see smoke in the top pushing, and we can see people at the top floor windows. So set up the rig. I go up the aerial, and there's like a family of 6-7 people right there. And it turns out they're in the stairwell. Now, we got fire in this first floor stairwell. It's coming up. And back then, the building owners, they would padlock the bulkhead doors on some of these buildings. So these people, these poor souls, were going up. The doors padlocked. I got them all there. I'm giving 1045s. Guys came up behind me. We're passing kids out. Make a long story short, we get them all out. A couple of us got, meritorious awards. Don't think anything of it. Then 2 years later, I got called down to testify in a trial against these guys are arsonists. They said a couple different fires, and you're waiting to go into court and testify. It's like, I'd rather go to any fire in the world than have to go to a trial thing. But what was cool about it, Mike, the ADA brings these people in the room, and I'm sitting there with 2 other guys, and I'm like, who are these people? And the ADA, he goes, these are the people that you rescued. And it was a couple of years later, and I was like, wow, this was, he gave us some time with them. As a woman and a couple of kids, and they were much older. And, he told them that these are the guys that were there that night. And it was, that to me, that was the proudest moment to see these people, and just, spend, having an emotional moment with those people. It was pretty cool, see how emotional they were. And it's like, you kind of forget it, you move on. It's like, and the ADA was laughing. He goes, I said, man, you got me with that one. That was pretty cool, so that was a pretty proud moment.
And what I would say is another thing I learned from that fire was sometimes the things that you're not looking for are problems that are there and you don't know it. And what I mean by that is, like that day, one of the officers was working for another guy. Another fireman was working for another fireman. Well, those guys who off that tour, what do you think they're saying to me? I should have been there. It should have been me. Why did I take that tour off? And you don't think about stuff like that. And so, when you have these incidents, that's why you need to have, people trained within your department that can, peer counselors or whatever who are trained to it or have things available to, and to look for those things, because these things are happening below the ground and you want to catch it before it happens. And here's something that happened to me personally with this. So just before this fire, Ray Downey had called me up, and he was starting the Special Operations Operating Battalion, and they were looking for chiefs who had experience. And so when Ray had called me up to say if I would be interested, and my first comment was, "Hey Ray, did you call the right guy? I think we got the wrong number." He says, "No, I'm not looking for a rescue firefighter. I'm looking for a chief to supervise." And he says, "We're going to train you. You're going to take all the classes like everybody else. I'm not asking you to be a rescue firefighter. I'm asking you to be a chief because the command is just getting so big." And then right after the fire, I called him up. I said, "Listen, there's no way I can leave now. I can't leave the battalion." But then what happened about 2 months later, I get a call and in the firehouse, and I got a call from another chief. And this chief had a fire up he had a fire in another borough where a officer got killed. And he called me up and he said, "Listen, Tom, we've crossed each other paths. I said, "Yeah, I know who you are." He said, "I've been thinking of calling you for 2 months." And he said, "I've dialed your number and I've hung up a few times." He says, "But no, I need to talk. I need to talk to him." And I said, "Yeah, what's up?" He says, "Well, I had this fire." "Yeah, I'm aware." He says, "Okay, I just want you to listen to me. Just listen to me." And he told me how that fire impacted him and how it took him a period of time to realize it. And as he's talking to me, I have the phone. This Chief John Ivol is sitting there, super guy, and all he hears is me saying, yeah, I got you on that one, yeah." And so the guy finished. He says, "Listen, I'm not telling you what to do with it. You need to go to counseling. I'm just telling you, this is what happened to me. This is what I experienced. And you do whatever you want with the information, but I just felt better talking to you, And I said, "Listen, I'm glad you did call me. Believe me." And so I hung up the phone, and John Iovola says, "Tom, what's going on?" So I tell him everything the guy, and I said, "John, I've been waiting for the other shoe to fall, and that shoe fell 2 months ago, and I just didn't see it." And John said to me, "Tom, for the last 3 weeks, we've been sitting around trying to figure out how we can approach you because you've changed. You may not see it, but how you're handling people, how you're doing stuff you never did before." And I says, "Yeah, no, I got to think about this." And so I went home and straightened out a few things that I sort of, probably was taken out on them. And then I called Ray Downey back up and I said, "Listen, I need to change. I think I need to change. It's everything's settled down here. I need to change. I need to change the scenery." And he said, "Okay, let me work out the details." So I would say to people who have these incidents, these things are going to happen, and you got to be prepared for the fallout and to watch the guys, because people are going to be impacted in different ways. We got to take care of the family right away. That's the priority. But we also got to take care of those guys that are still in the firehouse. And no, I don't know where I'm going with this. I didn't think I was going to get this far into the story. So it's and after that, I'm going to be honest with you. You have a lot of people on. I'm probably sure you have people on your show because I've seen them in other places. I know who they are, and we talk about the fun and games of the fire service and all that. But I remember John Vigiano. John was one of my captains, who was captain of 176. I just happened to stop by the firehouse when 2 probies showed up, and who got assigned to 170. One got assigned to the engine, one got assigned to the truck. And I remember as John was talking to them, I remember John's line was, just remember this. This is the greatest job in the world. But when we have a bad day, we got a bad day. Because somebody got killed. And he says, that's why you got to come to work prepared. You got to learn your craft. You got to support the people around you. Be a part of this firehouse, because we can't control everything. And you want to do the best of your ability to avoid those bad days.